All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is the 16th of December, Tuesday. Mars has just ingressed into Capricorn. Now, if you are online and you've been watching the news, obviously, you have seen that there's been a number of unfortunate events that have occurred recently, including a mass shooting at a Hanukkah event at Bondi Beach, as well as in America a shooting at Brown University that had a fewer number of casualties, mind you, but still unfortunate to see. And if you were to ask me from an astrological point of view what was going on, um, I would first of all take a look at what's happening with Mars here, because Mars is the planet that rules violence and aggression and that kind of stuff. And Mars was in a square to Saturn and about to change signs. Um, there's also sometimes the end degree of a sign is called the anaretic degree or the killing degree. And this comes from the bound and term rulers of the end of the sign always being ruled by Mars. So whenever Mars is switching signs, it's like the beginning and ending, and there is uh, uh, sometimes it can be a sign of some sort of aggressive situation taking place, right? Now, the other thing, certain things to consider about this is that we had a stellium in Sagittarius here. If we just wind it back, I could show you what this looked like. That we had Venus, Sun, and Mars all together in Sagittarius, and they were all squaring Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Now, this Saturn's the malefic. Um, there could be between the square, the feelings of anger or frustration, or maybe lashing out due to an act, a sense of being frustrated with a sense of futility or something like that. I don't know. I'm not going to interpret too much of what was going on, but one of the things, like in BC where I live, I did a video on the Mars Saturn conjunction talking about how we had a grizzly bear attack in Bella Coola, but that happened more like in November. Like if you take it back around like here, when when it happened, Mars was not really in a very tight square, but it was just approaching the square to Saturn, and there's this idea of this sort of mounting pressure of the Mars Saturn conjunction. This whole time, Mars has been in Sagittarius, and so what we see here is we have this moment uh, where Mars changes signs, and now Mars is in Capricorn. And what you notice first of all is that leading up to it, you're getting this. You see these red lines here. The red lines here indicate the square. That once Mars goes into Capricorn, there's not really any aspects happening until we get Mars opposing Jupiter, which won't be until New Year's. But then I'm going to show you this because it's interesting. We get a triple conjunction with Sun, Venus, and Mars in an opposition to Jupiter, which is retrograde in Cancer. Now, this is particularly going to be an interesting one because, well, for one thing, it just so happens that what an opposition means is that when a planet is opposite to the sun, it means the planet is physically closer to the Earth than at any other point in time. And Jupiter is the largest planet in the zodiac. So the largest planet in the zodiac is going to be closest to Earth, and it's also going to be in a point of exaltation. But then it's going to be opposing a triple conjunction of Sun, Venus, and Mars is going to be exalted. And this, so there's something about this where the events, I should also say that in the midst of all of this mess, in the past few days, there's apparently also been in America, they've arrested a extremist terrorist group who were apparently planning terrorist attacks on New Year's, but they were linked towards left wing progressive ideologies. Now, I don't know if any of us have, rather than, I think it's important basically to accept that regardless if, regardless if you believe in a certain kind of political opinion or something like that, there could always be the potential of unsavory characters who believe the same things as you, but in a way that's more violent and extreme or something like that. And I would just like to make a disclaimer that here at Dan's Astrology, the purpose of this channel has never been to promote any sort of extremist ideology, although I will say outright that I do have an interest in progressive politics. I don't believe just simply that these are like two wings of the same bird, and that to identify with one over the other is to be trapped by the system. Um, I do. I actually also am a when it comes to all these political events, I also, in the midst of all of this mess of bad news, I should also just take time to point out that where I live, we have a good news story from this position, in that it's kind of like topsy turvy a little bit feeling, because a lot of my experience going online is to look at the state of politics or whatever's going on in the world, and seeing, basically the American left in a state of weakness, dysfunction, and disarray, and to see huge waves of right wing populism all over the world. And that at least in British Columbia, I'm pleased to announce that following the Conservative Party leader of BC, John Rustad, stepped down or was forced to, that there was this controversy where there was a new political party called OneBC that was a kind of a splinter group of people who were too extreme for the conservatives. And it's interestingly enough that this was a very small splinter group that only had two MLAs, the leader and the one person who wasn't the leader. And now the leader is being ousted from her own party, even though they only have two MLAs in the party. So I mean, it attempts. I can't resist, but like maybe they should rename themselves from OneBC to being one MLA. Ha ha ha! Get it right? Because they only have one MLA. So instead of being like BC United, it's just like one person who doesn't have has any ability to strike, cooperate with anybody. But this was the whole here in BC. I'm not. This isn't also the same to say that like the NDP is perfect, or that are as leftists or progressives we don't. It's always just easy here in British Columbia, but we have experienced a critical victory at the provincial level, where basically the Liberals. It was before it was the Liberals and the NBC, a more of a center right wing Liberal party, and they disbanded, formed a number of a lot of them jumped ship as the Conservatives or BC United, and that the Conservatives are falling apart, the OneBC is falling apart. We're looking good here in Western Canada. And I think it provides a certain situation where if you look at the legacy of British Columbia, I'm happy. Like I grew up here with a background climate of hearing about like Naomi Klein, No Logo, reading Adbusters magazines, and there's just like a certain kind of default kind of background anti-corporatism, dare I say anti-capitalism, that you can say, I think when you're, if you're British Columbian, you can proudly say, like, I read Naomi Klein, I'm anti-capitalist, I'm an anti-corporatist, I'm against this kind of exploitive globalist neoliberalism, and it's basically just like you're a fish in water of people who believe the same thing as you. It's nothing that's too controversial, basically, right? And so, for me, at least, I feel at home here as a British Columbian, to speak from this perspective, and not feel like I'm being targeted as a domestic terrorist, because I grew up this way, basically, right, in a place where a community that reinforced these beliefs. Here in Canada, we, especially in British Columbia, Naomi Klein, apparently her parents came to Canada as draft dodgers running away from the Vietnam War. So there's always been a certain, here in Canada, we value anti war, progressive politics, anti oppression, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sorry to see that some of our neighbors to the south who may value the same things have been pushed to acts of violent extremism. Um, I tend to take approach more of, let's say, if you want a violent revolution, count me out, right? I think the Beatles said it best. You know, it's just not the way to do it. We're not. If you're going to be talking about Chairman Mao, count me out, okay? So we're gonna do things in a calm, collected way that has to do with gradual progress and change. And we're not going to get anywhere by creating terrorist groups. Okay, so just to clear up any possible confusion about that, where we stand here at Dan's Astrology on these important topics. So as we continue, I thought, I could just leave it here because this is getting into after Christmas, after New Year's. We're gonna have this triple conjunction. It's a rare thing. I think there's something um, that stands out for this for me, is that I have looked at what's going on into 2026. Particularly, one of the interesting things is that the planet Venus is going to be having a Venus retrograde later on this year in the sign of Scorpio. Um, Personally, I am actually a Venus and Scorpio native, so this should be an interesting Venus retrograde for me, I suppose. Um, One of the things about this which stands out to me is that if you use the traditional rulership scheme in the way that I do, that you will notice that Mars and Venus right now, they're going to be doing this conjunction in Capricorn, and that Mars is exalted, all that. And then when Venus does Venus retrograde, it's going to happen in Scorpio, which is a Mars sign, right? And so there's this whole 2026, to me, is, as I see it, seems to be characterized by being opened by this Venus Mars conjunction with the Sun, and this is a combined, this synodic cycle where Venus and Mars are both having a Kazemi moment, a critical moment of a new cycle, and that this is going to set up a dynamic which will then play out later on when Venus is retrograding in Scorpio, ruled by Mars, right? We're going to see that later on this year. Um, Also, keep in mind that the big conjunction this year is Saturn and Neptune, which will be ingressing into Aries, a Mars sign. So this there's something about this. We have an unfortunate wave of violent, shocking, stochastic terrorist events in the Christmas season, and at the moment, I don't think we're going to be. I think we're going to see a little bit of a, maybe Christmas will be kind of quiet, but then once we get to New Year's, this things could start rolling fairly aggressively, perhaps. After this critical moment here on January, there's also January 7th keep in mind that, I mean, like, we in 2021, January 6th was a very critical moment. Now it's kind of like the January 7th as a date. We could have some big events happening at the beginning of the year, and then what I'm just going to show you what happens here is that we have the stellium that's going to just keep rolling on through the zodiac, and then what we're going to end up happening is that we're going to have all this move into Aquarius, yeah, by the 23rd of January, and we're going to have a Mars Pluto conjunction, which um, looks a bit concerning. Around this time, we're going to be having the Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries, and then by the time Saturn and Neptune moves into Aries, the whole stellium is going to just roll into Pisces here. And then we also have the North Node in Pisces, meaning that we've got Mars in Pisces for the. This is a lunar eclipse here, right? We've got Mars influencing the eclipses, which is, I mean, not a great sign for the eclipses to have Mars there right on the North Node during the eclipses, but there you go. And then we have a solar eclipse here with Mars present and the Saturn and Neptune in Aries. You see where we're going with this, right? And then we're having this huge, massive, the air, all the planets are going to be in Aries here for spring season. It's going to be spring 2026. Looks like is going to be mad hectic from the astrology. I'm not going to do the full year ahead preview, but since we're talking about Mars and Capricorn, I thought I would show you basically what this is just the beginning of setting the stage for the first quarter of 2026 and a number of, Mars moving through the signs, hitting these important positions, and well, stay tuned. Anyways, I'll give more analysis, give you more details. Um, I'm sorry to anybody watching if you've been personally affected by any of the stuff going on. At least here in Canada, it feels like we're making some progress over conquering. We're making some kind of victories over the forces of ignorance and stupidity and all this kind of stuff here. I don't know if that is the same for the rest of the world, but I don't know. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Um, Keep on rocking in the free world. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas. All of that. Dan's Astrology is signing off for now. Thanks for watching.